You know, uh, you know that feeling when you get a totally vague text message from your boss and
Yeah.
all it says is, like, we need to talk.
Oh, man, the immediate stomach-dropping panic, just instantly.
Right. Your mind just starts racing through every single mistake you made over the last, 6 months. You
Oh.
instantly assume the worst.
Oh, absolutely. You're convinced you're getting fired. Mentally, you are already packing up your desk.
You're updating your resume, yeah. But then, you take a breath, you scroll up to look at the previous messages, and you realize they're just replying to a question you asked them 5 minutes ago about, like, the catering order for Friday's meeting.
Yeah, you just rushed straight to the meaning. You jumped right to the personal implication before you actually took a single second to observe the context.
Exactly. And we do this constantly. Our brains are actually wired for immediate survival and utility,
So
so we constantly scan information asking, well, how does this affect me?
it's a biological impulse.
It really is. We do it with text messages, we do it with news headlines, and as we're going to explore today, we do it with the texts we read, especially ancient texts. So welcome to today's deep dive. We have a fascinating source document in front of us today, and it maps out this masterclass in how to short-circuit that biological impulse to jump to conclusions.
Right, specifically by using a method called inductive study, which is such a vital concept because, most of us naturally read deductively.
Deductively, right.
Yeah,
Meaning you start with the conclusion.
exactly. Deductive reading means you start with a conclusion or an assumption, and you just scan the text looking for evidence to back up what you already think. But inductive reading is the exact opposite. You gather the raw evidence first without judgment, and you let the facts build the conclusion for you.
So to see how this works in practice, our source material applies this inductive method to a highly dramatic biblical narrative. We're going to be looking at the story of a man named Naaman from the book of 2 Kings chapter 5. And if you are listening to this right now, our framework gives us a golden rule for today's deep dive.
Oh, the big rule.
The big rule: don't rush to the application of the story first. Understand the story.
It is so tempting to skip to the end, though. We want the moral of the story. We want those 3 quick life lessons we can just, slap on a motivational poster.
Right. But the inductive method lays out this strict three-step flow: observation, interpretation, and application. First, what do I see? Second, what does it mean? And third, what should change? But today, we are firmly planting our flag in step one.
Just step 1.
Just step one. Today, we observe. We are not looking for the modern application yet. We just want to know what the text actually says.
I think the best way to think about this is like being a crime scene investigator. A good detective doesn't walk into a room, look at a body, and immediately yell, "The butler did it."
Yeah, that would be jumping to application.
Exactly. A good investigator tapes off the room. They dust for prints. They note the temperature of the room. They log all the evidence without actually deciding what it means yet.
I love that analogy. And I'm going to hold our feet to the fire today to make sure we stay behind that yellow tape. I'm going to be the methodologist here. I'll focus strictly on the logical framework and the rules of this observation phase.
And I will happily be the narrative analyst and trace the actual evidence. Because the drama, the characters, and the specific details hiding in plain sight in this narrative are just, they're incredible once you actually look at them.
Okay, let's tape off the room. Before we can figure out who is doing what, we have to establish where they are standing.
Right.
The very first tool in our observation framework is the setting.
Setting the stage.
Right, we are answering the where and the when of the classic journalistic model. From a logical perspective, setting is crucial because it establishes the invisible stakes of a story without the author having to use clumsy exposition. So let's look at 2 Kings chapter 5, specifically verse 2. What is the baseline situation here?
Well, the text immediately places us in a geopolitical hotspot. The action is happening between Syria, which is also referred to as Aram in the text, and Israel. And the specific detail the author includes is that there is ongoing conflict.
Like active war.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Border raids are actively happening. Armed bands from Syria have been crossing over the border into Israel and taking captives.
Okay, see, this changes the entire genre of the story for me. If I'm just skimming this text to find a nice spiritual lesson about healing, I miss the stakes entirely. This isn't some medical drama about a guy trying to cure a skin condition. This reads more like a Cold War thriller.
That's a perfect way to put it. The tension is completely baked into the geography.
Because we're about to see Naaman, who is a Syrian commander, cross over into Israel. He's an enemy general crossing into hostile territory during an act of conflict. Logging that piece of evidence completely shifts this from a simple personal journey into a highly tense international incident.
Right. The text is subtly letting the reader know that this is an enemy coming to Israel's God for help. The stakes are massive before a single word of dialogue is even spoken.
And think about how often we ignore this setting when we read the news today. We see a headline about a political figure from a rival party, and we just strip away all the context of where they were speaking or who they were addressing.
We just assume their motive right off the bat.
Exactly. But observation forces us to actually read the room first.
And because this specific room is, as you said, a geopolitical powder keg, the people forced to navigate it become intensely interesting.
Which brings the actors onto our stage.
Yeah.
Our second observation tool is the character table. When we observe characters, we aren't just making a list of names.
Right, we're digging deeper.
We're cataloging 3 specific pieces of evidence: who they are, how they are described, and the clues in the text that point to why they act, their underlying motivations.
And this text gives us a truly fascinating dramatis personae. Let's start with the protagonist, Naaman. The text describes him as a great commander. He is highly respected by his master, the king of Syria. He's a valiant soldier. But
There's a but.
a huge but. The verse ends with a massive pivot. He is leprous. He has a severe skin disease.
So there is a severe dissonance in his character right from the start.
Yeah.
He has the highest possible social status, but he's suffering from a condition that, in the ancient world, was essentially a slow death sentence and deeply, deeply stigmatizing.
Exactly.
So what are the clues about his motivation when he actually goes looking for a cure?
Well, just watch what he brings with him. He brings a massive fortune in silver, gold, and clothing. He brings an official letter from the king of Syria to the king of Israel. He clearly expects a grand theatrical transaction.
So the clue here points strongly to a man whose entire worldview is built on pride, power, and very rigid expectations of how things should work based on his elite status.
Right, he thinks he can buy or just command a miracle.
Okay, let's look at the other side of the border. This great, proud enemy commander shows up in Israel with a literal fortune and a demanding letter. The king of Israel reads this letter. What is his reaction?
He completely panics. The text says he tears his clothes, which is an ancient expression of extreme grief or alarm. He asks, "Am I God to kill and make alive?"
You know, I'm looking at this king, and my first instinct is to interpret him as a coward. But if we stick to the facts of the setting we just established,
The border raids and the tension.
right, he literally has a hostile general at his door demanding a medical impossibility. I would panic too. It is a perfectly rational political reaction. The king assumes this is a trap. He thinks it's an impossible demand meant to serve as a pretext for a full-scale invasion.
It is entirely rational politically. But the deeper clue is what his political panic actually causes him to forget.
Oh, interesting. What does he forget?
He is so consumed by his own limitations that he completely forgets he isn't the only power in Israel. He forgets that an actual prophet of God exists right there in his own kingdom. His fear creates this total theological amnesia.
Wow. Okay, so a proud, expectant enemy commander and a terrified, forgetful king. The people with the most power in this story are entirely paralyzed by their own status.
Which perfectly introduces the prophet, Elisha. Because he is the complete opposite of the king. He is entirely calm. When he hears the king is panicking, he sends a message saying basically, "Send him to me so he will know there is a prophet in Israel."
But when Naaman actually arrives at Elisha's house with his horses and his chariots, Elisha's behavior is really fascinating based on the observation rules.
Oh, it's great. Elisha doesn't even come to the door. He just sends a messenger out with a painfully simple instruction. Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored.
So the clue to Elisha's motivation is total confidence. He doesn't need to put on a show for the great commander. He doesn't need to match Naaman's theatricality.
Not at all. Now, looking at this character table from our source document, there is a character we skipped over, and we really need to go back to her because she is arguably the catalyst for the entire narrative, the servant girl.
I am so glad you brought her up because she really trips me up if I'm trying not to jump to interpretations.
It's hard not to.
It really is. But let's stick strictly to observation. The text describes her as young, unnamed, and a captive. She was taken from Israel by the Syrians during those violent border raids we established in the setting. She is now serving Naaman's wife.
So her very presence in the story is a direct result of the hostility between these two nations.
Right. And here is my struggle as the methodologist trying to just log facts. Why on earth would an enslaved girl who was ripped from her home by the Syrian army, wished that her master, the very commander of that army, be healed.
It doesn't make sense on the surface.
It defies all human logic. Why doesn't she want him to suffer? It feels like the text is begging me to interpret her psychological state.
It is a brilliant question, but we've got to keep the yellow tape up. If we stick strictly to the rules of observation, we don't guess her psychological state. We just look at what she actually does.
Okay, sure.
And the text simply shows us that she speaks up and says to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy."
She give them the intel.
She provides the intel. And what is the clue that provides? It reveals two profound facts. First, she possesses a deep, unwavering faith in the prophet of her homeland, even while she's in exile. Second, she actually shows genuine concern for her captor. Despite her enslavement, she points him toward life rather than death.
That is staggering when you just let the raw data of the story sit there without trying to turn it into a sermon yet. And she isn't the only lowly character who acts this way. Later in the story, we meet Naaman's own servants.
Yes. When Naaman gets the simple instruction from Elisha to wash in the river, he gets furiously angry and wants to storm off. It's his servants who step in. They approach him, they reason with him respectfully, and they urge him to do this simple thing.
And the clue there.
They possess practical wisdom and a level-headedness that their great commander completely lacks.
This sets up a massive structural irony in the text. I mean, I'm looking at our completed character table now. You have these figures with incredibly high status: Naaman, the king of Israel. And how are they functioning?
They're completely blind to reality. I mean, the king is spiraling into a panic attack, and Naaman is throwing a tantrum because his ego is bruised.
But then you look at the lowly characters. The captive servant girl, the unnamed servants traveling with Naaman. Their social status is at the absolute bottom of the barrel, yet they are the only ones who actually understand what is going on.
They possess clear vision. The text is building the stark contrast for us. High status is correlating with blindness, while low status is correlating with clarity and wisdom.
Okay, so we have our setting established, we have our characters mapped out, and their underlying motivations exposed on the table. Now we need to see how all this evidence collides. This brings us to the final tool in our observation framework.
Plot.
Right. The plot is quite simply the sequence of events. How does the narrative move from the beginning through the middle to the end?
It's the architecture of the escalation.
Exactly. The inductive framework gives us a very simple form to trace. The beginning introduces the problem, the middle develops the problem and introduces a complication, and the end gives us the resolution. But as we map this out, the framework demands we hunt for one specific mechanism. What is the question we're supposed to be asking at every stage?
What changes everything? You are hunting for the turning point, the hinge on which the entire narrative swings.
Okay, let's trace the escalation. The beginning is straightforward. Naaman is introduced, his greatness is established, and the core problem is revealed. He has leprosy.
Right, and then we move into the middle, and the problem develops. He travels to Israel seeking a cure. But as we observed, he brings his massive ego and his wealth, which causes the king of Israel to panic. So the problem is compounding. The geopolitical tensions are rising.
Then comes the complication. Naaman arrives at the prophet's house, expecting this grand transaction.
And Elisha refuses to participate in Naaman's theater. He gives that painfully simple instruction: wash in the muddy Jordan River 7 times.
Naaman's reaction is explosive. He is deeply offended. He says, "I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy." A simple bath in a local river insults his pride. He is a great man, so he demands a great cure.
He's literally turning his chariots around in a rage. The mission is about to be a complete failure.
We are at the absolute climax of the tension, and I want to challenge you here, because finding the actual turning point requires careful observation. What changes everything? Is it the moment the water touches his skin? Is there some magical flash of light?
No, and this is where the inductive method really pays off. The turning point is not a supernatural moment. The turning point is a quiet conversation. What changes everything is the moment Naaman stops his chariots and actually listens to his lowly servants.
The servants who step in.
Right. They say to him, "My father, if the prophet had commanded you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more, when all he said to you was, 'Wash and be clean'?"
So the turning point is an internal choice.
He has to choose to lay down his expectations. He has to choose to humble himself and listen to the people at the bottom of the social ladder. That internal surrender is the hinge of the entire plot.
which catapults us to the end of the plot, the resolution. What is different now compared to the beginning?
Well, physically, he obeys, he washes 7 times, and the text says his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. He's clean. But narratively, based on the plot we just traced, his entire disposition has shifted. The proud, demanding commander has become a humble recipient of a gift he couldn't buy.
Wow. Okay, as the methodologist keeping us behind the yellow tape, I have to say the CSI work is complete. We have the setting a tense border conflict. We have the characters' proud leaders blinded by status and wise servants seeing clearly. We have the plot escalating tension resolved by a difficult choice of humility. But our source document requires one final task before we are allowed to take the tape down and move to interpretation. We have to look for emphasis.
We have to step back and look at the whole canvas we just painted. What takes up the most space?
Good observation requires spotting contrasts and surprises in the raw data. When you look at the evidence we gathered, what are the glaring contrasts that jump out?
They're incredibly sharp. I mean, you have the great versus the lowly. You have the proud versus the humble. You have expectation versus reality. Everything Naaman and the king expected to happen was completely wrong. Everything the marginalized servant suggested was entirely right.
And the surprises. For me, the biggest surprise remains the catalyst. An entire international incident resulting in the healing of a top-tier enemy general was set in motion because a captive enslaved child decided to speak up with faith and compassion. That is a wild, subversive narrative choice by the author.
It is deeply subversive, and the ultimate surprise is that a Syrian commander, the enemy of Israel, is healed by Israel's God at all. Given the setting of violent border raids, this is the last thing any ancient reader would expect to happen.
So we've observed all of this. We haven't guessed, we haven't spiritualized, we haven't jumped to the modern moral of the story. We just looked at the text. Now, and only now, does the inductive method allow us to transition toward interpretation. We can finally ask, based strictly on the evidence we observed, what does this story mean?
Well, when you weigh all the evidence, the pride of Naaman, the panic of the king, the profound wisdom of the servants, the simplicity of the command, and the internal turning point of surrender, the text is heavily emphasizing a very specific truth. Divine intervention, or God's blessing, doesn't arrive through human status. It cannot be purchased with wealth, and it cannot be commanded by power. It only arrives through a humble response to his word.
The mighty general had to become like a lowly servant to get what he desperately needed.
That is the meaning, and it is derived directly and safely from the observation.
Which proves the entire genius of this masterclass. Let's recap this foolproof method for anyone listening who wants to apply this to their own reading. When you approach a narrative, step 1 is observation. Be the CSI investigator. Define the setting. Where and when is this happening, and what are the invisible stakes? Map out the characters. Who are they? How are they described? And what are the clues to their motivations? Trace the plot. What happens from beginning to end? And through all of it, constantly ask,
What changes everything? Hunt for that internal turning point.
yes. The core takeaway from our deep dive today is that you cannot build a solid house of meaning if you haven't laid the foundation of facts. Good interpretation always starts with thorough observation.
If you rush the evidence, you ruin the conclusion.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that biological impulse to jump to conclusions. I want to leave you with a final thought experiment to ponder today. Think about the next time you feel deeply offended by something someone says to you. Maybe it's a coworker or a friend in the middle of a heated argument. Your brain is going to want to jump straight to application. You will want to assign terrible motives to them and react defensively.
You'll want to turn your chariots around in a rage.
Exactly. But before you do, ask yourself the question from our plot framework. What changes everything right now? Because as we saw today, the turning point almost never comes from a magical flash of light, or the other person suddenly changing their mind. The turning point is usually you choosing to pause, laying down your pride, and just observing the facts of the situation without judgment. The next time you're ready to panic or get angry tape off the room, look at the setting, look at the characters, look at the plot, and ask yourself, what am I actually observing?
It just might change everything.